The crystalline fragment hummed in Kellen's palm, its surface etched with symbols that predated any written language he knew. The half-elf ranger had found it 3 days ago, buried beneath the collapsed archway of what locals called the Forgotten. Catacombs, ruins so ancient that even the dwarven historians of Iron Peak had no records of who built them. Now, as he stood in the crowded taproom of the Gilded Compass, watching the shard pulse with an inner light that matched the rhythm of his heartbeat, Kellen understood that this discovery would change everything. "You're certain about the inscription?" asked Myra Stoneforge, her calloused fingers tracing the air above the fragment without quite touching it. The dwarf cleric's silver-streaked beard was braided with prayer beads that clinked softly as she leaned closer, her gray eyes reflecting the artifact's ethereal glow. "The pattern matches the prophecies in the Temple of First Light, but I never thought I'd see one with my own eyes." Kellen nodded, sliding the fragment across the scarred wooden table. "The outer ring describes a sealing ritual. The inner symbols—" He paused, glancing around the tavern to ensure no one was listening too closely. "They're a warning. Something about the Sundering and the tools used to prevent it." Across from them, Theron Ashwick drummed his fingers against his wineglass, the human wizard's perpetual expression of mild boredom barely concealing his interest. His dark blue robes bore the silver constellation embroidery of the Arcane Collegium. Though he'd been expelled 2 years prior for excessive curiosity regarding Forbidden's research, a badge of honor as far as Theron was concerned. "The First Era ended approximately 4,000 years ago," he said, his voice carrying the clipped precision of formal education. "The Sundering was a cataclysm so profound that it reshaped continents and extinguished entire civilizations. If this fragment is genuinely from that period, it's not just historically significant. It's potentially dangerous." Dangerous how? This came from Zara Quickfoot, the halfling rogue who'd been nursing the same ale for an hour while her keen eyes catalogued every entrance, exit, and potential threat in the room. She was small even by halfling standards, but Kellen had seen her scale a 40-foot wall in under a minute and pick locks that would stymie master thieves twice her age. Theron lifted the fragment with a conjured disc of force, examining it from multiple angles without making physical contact. The Sundering wasn't a natural disaster. It was a weapon, or rather, a consequence of weapons too powerful for mortal comprehension. The architect races who ruled during the First Era crafted artifacts that could reshape reality itself. When they went to war, the world nearly ended. He set the fragment down carefully. If relics from that era are awakening now, after millennia of dormancy, something has changed in the fundamental structure of our world. A chill ran down Kellen's spine that had nothing to do with the autumn wind seeping through the tavern's shutters. He'd spent the better part of a decade exploring ruins across the Shattered Kingdoms, mapping forgotten dungeons and cataloging lost treasures for the Antiquarian Society. Most of what he found were mundane remnants, corroded weapons, crumbling pottery, the occasional enchanted trinket whose magic had faded to barely perceptible tingles. This was different. The fragment felt alive, aware, as though it recognized him. "There's more," Kellen said, pulling a weathered journal from his pack. The leather cover was cracked and stained, its pages filled with his careful sketches and notations. "I've been tracking patterns for months. 3 weeks ago, a merchant caravan reported seeing lights emanating from the Obsidian Spire, a tower that's been dark for centuries. 2 weeks after that, earthquakes struck the Whispering Valley, and witnesses described hearing voices in languages no one could identify. Then 5 days ago, the river near Thornhaven ran backwards for an entire night." Myra's expression grew grave. "The signs of awakening." The temple elders spoke of such omens in their oldest texts, phenomena that would herald the return of the First Era's legacy. She pulled a small book bound in white leather from her belt, flipping through pages covered in dense theological script. "Here, when the sleepers stir and ancient words echo in present tongues, when stone remembers and water forgets its course, the sealed ones shall test the worth of the inheritor races." Cheerful, Zara muttered, though her usual smirk had faded. "So, we're talking about a world-ending catastrophe, possibly triggered by people poking around in places they shouldn't be." She shot Kellen a pointed look. Present company included. Kellen couldn't argue with that assessment, but he also couldn't ignore what he discovered. The fragment wasn't just an artifact. It was a key, and somewhere in the world's ancient bones, locks were beginning to turn. The inscription mentions the Vault of Echoes. It's supposedly located beneath the ruins of Aetherholm, the last great city of the architect races. He tapped a map spread across the table, indicating a mountain range 300 miles to the northeast. According to legend, the architects stored their most powerful creations there before the Sundering. If other fragments like this one are awakening, then we need to reach the vault before someone else does. Theron finished. His scholarly detachment had evaporated, replaced by an intensity that reminded Kellen why the wizard had been expelled. Theron didn't just study magic. He hungered for it, pursued it with a single-minded determination that bordered on obsession. The Collegium has been searching for Aetherholm for generations. If they learn about this fragment, they'll dispatch a full expedition. Not just the Collegium, Myra added quietly. The Order of the Platinum Flame considers First-Era artifacts to be divine tests. They believe such relics should be destroyed, not studied. And the Iron Covenant, she trailed off, but everyone at the table understood. The Iron Covenant was a mercenary organization that sold its services to the highest bidder, and they'd shown disturbing interest in ancient weaponry lately. Kellen felt the weight of multiple gazes settling on him. He hadn't intended to form an adventuring company when he'd called this meeting, but the four of them had worked together before, tomb delving in the crypts of morning, escorting a caravan through bandit-infested territory, even stopping a necromancer from raising an army in the blighted marshes. They trusted each other, which was rarer than gold in their profession. "We leave at dawn," he said, making the decision. "Pack for a month-long expedition. The route to Aetherholm crosses the Thornwood, then through the scarred peaks. It won't be easy. When is it ever?" Zara replied, but she was already calculating supply lists in her head. Kellen could see it in the way her lips moved soundlessly. "I'll need climbing gear. Lots of rope. And if we're going into First-Era ruins, I want at least a dozen vials of sovereign glue and universal solvent. Those ancient trap mechanisms don't respond well to conventional lockpicking." Theron was already scribbling notes, his quill scratching rapidly across parchment. "I'll transcribe protective wards. First, Era magic operates on different principles than contemporary spellwork. Our standard defenses might prove inadequate." He looked up, his dark eyes gleaming with academic fervor. "This could revolutionize our understanding of arcane theory." The architects manipulated reality at a fundamental level, treating the laws of magic as suggestions rather than limitations. "Just make sure your revolutionary understanding doesn't get us killed," Myra said dryly, though there was fondness beneath her stern tone. She'd saved Theron from his own experiments more than once, healing wounds caused by spells that backfired spectacularly. "I'll petition the temple for blessing and supplies. They may disapprove of our intentions, but they won't deny aid to those venturing into genuine danger." As his companions dispersed to make preparations, Kellen remained at the table, studying the fragment. Its glow had dimmed slightly, as though conserving energy, but he could still feel it resonating with something deep within. The earth, a call and response across vast distances and longer ages. The architects had been elves, dwarves, humans, and other races working in concert, their civilization a beacon of cooperation and achievement that modern kingdoms could barely imagine. What had driven them to create weapons capable of breaking the world? And what had finally pushed them to use those weapons, knowing the cost? Tomorrow they would begin seeking answers. Tonight, Kellen allowed himself to wonder if some questions were better left unasked, some doors better left sealed. But even as the thought formed, he knew he couldn't turn back. The fragment had chosen him, or perhaps he'd chosen it when he first stepped into those forgotten catacombs. Either way, the path forward was set. He just hoped they'd survive what waited at its end. The Thornwood lived up to its name. 5 days into their journey, Kellen's arms bore a dozen scratches from thorned vines that seemed to deliberately snag at exposed skin, and his boots squelched with moisture from the perpetual mist that clung to the forest floor. The ancient trees towered overhead, their massive trunks wrapped in phosphorescent moss that provided the only light in the perpetual gloom. According to local legends, the Thornwood had been a garden during the First Era, but the Sundering had twisted it into something darker, more primal. "The vegetation is responding to the fragment," Theron observed, pointing at a cluster of vines that had curled away from Kellen's pack as they passed. "Notice how the growth patterns change in our vicinity? It's subtle, but the plant life recognizes First-Era energy signatures and reacts defensively." Myra hacked through a particularly dense thicket with her blessed warhammer, the weapon's silver inlays glowing faintly with divine light. Defensively implies these plants are protecting something. Or themselves. She paused, wiping sweat from her brow. I don't like this. The forest feels aware. It is aware, Zara called from 20 feet above, having scrambled up a massive oak to scout ahead. The halfling's small size and natural agility made her an excellent climber, and she'd taken to scouting from the canopy rather than trudging through the undergrowth. There's a clearing about half a mile northeast. Looks artificial, too symmetrical to be natural. Might be first-era construction. They altered course, pushing through the increasingly hostile flora. Kellen had traveled through dangerous wilderness before, the blighted marshes, the ashen wastes, even the screaming desert, but the thornwood felt different. It didn't just present obstacles. It seemed to actively resist their passage, as though the forest itself wanted them gone. The clearing Zara had spotted was indeed artificial, a perfect circle roughly 50 yards in diameter, bordered by standing stones that hummed with residual enchantment. At the center stood the remains of a structure, too weathered to identify its original purpose, but clearly built with the geometric precision characteristic of architect race construction. Callan approached cautiously, noting how the fragment in his pack had begun vibrating more intensely. These stones are marker wards, Theron said, examining the nearest monolith. Its surface was covered in the same script that adorned the fragment, though the symbols here were larger, deeper. They're maintaining a preservation field. Everything inside this circle has been protected from decay for millennia. He ran his fingers along the carved grooves, his expression awed. The spell matrices are still functional. After 4,000 years, they're still functional. Myra knelt beside the ruined structure, brushing away layers of moss and accumulated debris. There's an opening here. Stairs leading down. She looked up at Kellen. Whatever this place was, the important parts are underground. Of course they were. Kellen had learned that the architect races built most of their critical infrastructure below ground, where it could be better protected from both attack and the elements. He pulled out his enchanted lantern, a gift from the Antiquarian Society that never needed oil and could illuminate even magical darkness, and approached the stairs. The descent took them 30 feet below the surface, into a chamber that defied the decay evident above ground. Here, preservation spells had maintained everything in pristine condition. Walls of polished white stone inlaid with veins of silver and gold, ceiling mosaics depicting scenes from the First Era's history, and at the chamber's center, a pedestal supporting a crystalline sphere identical in design to the fragment Kellen carried. It's a repository, Theron breathed, his voice hushed with reverence. A storage facility for First Era knowledge and artifacts. He moved toward the sphere, hands outstretched, but Myra caught his wrist. Wait, she said sharply. Look at the floor. Kellen followed her gaze and spotted what she'd noticed. Barely visible pressure plates arranged in a complex pattern around the pedestal. Traps? Zara? The halfling was already circling the chamber, examining every surface with professional thoroughness. Oh, these are beautiful, she murmured appreciatively. See those channels in the walls? Acid dispensers, probably. And the ceiling tiles are loose drop hazard. The floor plates are actually the least concerning part. The real problem is, she pointed at nearly invisible threads crisscrossing the air between the entrance and the pedestal, arcane tripwires. Touch one and the whole system activates. Can you disable them? Kellen asked. Zara grinned, pulling a set of specialized tools from her belt. I can try. But I'll need absolute silence and no distractions. For the next hour, they watched as Zara performed what could only be described as a dance. She contorted her small frame through impossible angles, slipping between tripwires with millimeters to spare, her picks and probes dismantling trap mechanisms with surgical precision. Sweat beaded on her forehead, and once when a pressure plate shifted unexpectedly, she froze completely for 30 heartbeats before finding a safe position. Finally, she reached the pedestal. Here's the interesting part. She called back. This sphere isn't trapped. The traps are protecting the chamber from intruders, but the artifact itself wants to be found. There's a resonance mechanism built into the pedestal. It'll only activate for someone carrying a fragment. Kellen joined her carefully, following the safe path she'd marked with chalk. When he drew close enough, the fragment in his pack flared with brilliant light, and the sphere on the pedestal responded in kind. The two objects seemed to communicate, pulses of energy flowing between them in a language of pure light. Then the sphere spoke. Not in words exactly, but in understanding that flooded directly into Callan's mind. He staggered, nearly triggering a tripwire before Mira caught him. Images cascaded through his consciousness. Vast cities of impossible architecture. Beings of pure energy working alongside mortal races. And at the center of it all, 12 artifacts of supreme power arranged in a configuration that held reality itself stable. The Keystones. That's what the sphere called them. 12 artifacts created by the architect race's greatest minds, each one anchoring a fundamental aspect of existence. They'd been designed to prevent reality from fragmenting, to maintain the laws of nature and magic in harmony. But during the Sundering, when the architect races had turned their power against each other, the Keystones had been scattered, hidden, sealed away to prevent their misuse. Now they were awakening, all 12 of them, responding to some cosmic alignment or trigger that the sphere's message couldn't or wouldn't fully explain. And scattered across the world were individuals like Kellen, people who'd found fragments and felt the call to seek the vaults where the Keystones slept. What did you see? Theron demanded when Kellen finally returned to full awareness. Kellen explained as best he could, though translating the sphere's direct mental communion into mere words felt inadequate. The fragment I found is part of one keystone. This sphere is part of another. They're pieces, not complete artifacts. To fully understand their purpose, to prevent whatever catastrophe their awakening might cause, we need to find the complete keystones in the vaults. An Etherholm? Myra asked. It's real. The lost vault city, where the architects made their final stand against the Sundering. The sphere's message suggests that 3 complete keystones are stored there, along with records explaining how they work and how to... He struggled for the right terminology. How to safely engage them without triggering another cataclysm. Zara had been examining the sphere more closely, and now she pointed at its base. There's an inscription here. Recent, relatively speaking, maybe a few hundred years old. Someone else found this place and left a message. The inscription was in common, not the ancient script of the architects. Callan read it aloud. The Covenant knows. They seek the weapons, not the wisdom. Trust no one who claims righteous purpose. The road to Etherholm is marked by 3 trials: earth, mind, and sacrifice. May the inheritors prove worthy. A warning from a previous explorer. Someone who discovered the truth about the Keystones and recognized the danger if they fell into the wrong hands. The Iron Covenant, the mercenary organization Mira had mentioned, wasn't just interested in ancient weaponry. They knew about the Keystones and were actively searching for them. We need to move faster, Callan said grimly. If the Covenant reaches Etherholm first, the chamber shook. Dust rained from the ceiling and several of the disabled trap mechanisms sparked with residual energy. Through the vibration, Callan felt something massive moving through the earth above them, something drawn by the sphere's activation. Guardian, Theron said, his voice tight. First-era sites always had guardians. We just announced our presence to whatever's been sleeping here for the past 4 millennia. They ran. The guardian burst from the earth as they emerged from the underground chamber, a creature of living stone and twisted roots. Its form roughly humanoid but easily 20 feet tall. Its eyes glowed with the same ethereal light as the fragment, and when it roared, the sound resonated with such force that several nearby trees cracked and toppled. Callan had fought monsters before, but this was different. The Guardian moved with impossible grace for something so massive, each step shaking the ground as roots erupted from the soil to ensnare them. Zara vanished into the underbrush immediately, her survival instincts overriding any thought of direct confrontation. Myra raised her holy symbol, channeling divine energy that formed a protective barrier around herself and Theron. It's not alive in the conventional sense, Theron shouted over the Guardian's roars, his hands already weaving an intricate spell pattern. It's a magical construct, animated by the same preservation enchantments that maintain this site. We need to disrupt its binding matrix. Easier said than accomplished. The Guardian's stone fists hammered against Myra's divine shield, each impact sending cracked spiderwebbing across the protective barrier. Callan fired arrows at the creature's joints, hoping to find weak points, but the missiles simply shattered against its rocky hide or were deflected by whipping roots. Then Zara struck. The halfling had circled behind the Guardian, and now she scrambled up its back with the agility of a squirrel, her daggers finding purchase in the gaps between stone plates. She wasn't trying to damage it. That would be futile, but rather to reach the crystalline core that Theron had identified as the construct's power source, a gem embedded between its shoulder blades. The Guardian sensed her presence and tried to dislodge her, spinning violently and slamming itself backwards against a tree. But Zara held on, her small fingers finding grips that shouldn't exist, and with a final lunge, she drove both daggers into the crystal core. The effect was immediate and catastrophic. The Guardian froze mid-motion, its roar cutting off abruptly. Cracks spread from the damaged core, racing across its stone body like lightning. Then it collapsed, breaking apart into rubble and dormant roots that rapidly began decomposing, the preservation magic finally failing after millennia of function. Zara tumbled free of the wreckage, landing in a practiced roll that brought her to her feet. That, she panted, was significantly more exciting than I prefer. But there was no time to celebrate. The Guardian's destruction had triggered something else, a resonance that Kellen felt through the fragment. Around the clearing, the standing stones began to glow, their carved symbols blazing with increasing intensity. The ground trembled again, but this wasn't another Guardian rising. This was the entire site awakening, responding to the broken preservation field. It's a beacon! Theron realized, his face pale. The Guardian's destruction activated a signal. Anyone with first-era detection equipment will know exactly where we are and what we found, which meant the Iron Covenant would come, and the Arcane Collegium, and the Order of the Platinum Flame, and potentially others, treasure hunters, rival adventuring companies, anyone who'd been tracking first-era activity. We have maybe a day's head start, Kellen said, making rapid calculations. Maybe less. We need to reach the scarred peaks before. He stopped. Through the trees, he'd spotted movement, figures approaching from the west, moving with military precision. Too soon for the beacon to have drawn them, which meant they'd already been in the area, already tracking something. Tracking them. Myra's sharp eyes picked out details. Iron Covenant. At least a dozen soldiers, possibly more. She hefted her warhammer. They're heavily armed. This isn't a scouting party, it's an assault force. The tactical situation was dire. The Covenant soldiers were trained professionals, equipped with military-grade weapons and armor. Kellen and his companions were skilled, but in direct combat against superior numbers, they'd be overwhelmed quickly. The forest, Zara said urgently. Use it. The Thornwood doesn't want anyone here. We felt its resistance. Maybe we can turn that against our pursuers. It was a desperate plan, but Kellen couldn't think of better alternatives. Theron, can you amplify the forest's defensive responses? Make it actively hostile to the Covenant soldiers? The wizard's eyes lit up with understanding. The vegetation is already magically reactive. If I introduce a catalyst, convince the forest that the Covenant represents a greater threat than we do. He pulled a handful of components from his pouches. Ingredients for a spell Kellen didn't recognize. I'll need 2 minutes. Keep them away from me. 2 minutes against a trained assault force. Kellen knocked an arrow. Myra raised her shield, and Zara disappeared into the shadows. The Covenant soldiers emerged from the tree line, led by a woman in decorated armor whose insignia marked her as a captain. She surveyed the destroyed Guardian and the glowing standing stones with obvious satisfaction. Well done, she called out. You've saved us considerable effort. Now surrender the fragments and any information you've gathered, and we'll allow you to leave with your lives. Kellen knew a lie when he heard one. The Covenant didn't leave witnesses, didn't take chances with loose ends. The fragments aren't weapons, he shouted back. They're keys to preventing another Sundering. If you take them without understanding their purpose, we understand perfectly, the captain interrupted. The keystones can reshape reality. With them, the Covenant will have the power to bring order to the chaos of these fractured kingdoms. We'll unite the world under a single banner, eliminate the conflicts that have plagued civilization for centuries. It was madness, the same hubris that had destroyed the architect races. The captain genuinely believed she was pursuing a noble goal, unable to see that wielding such power would only lead to destruction. Behind him, Kellen heard Theron chanting, his voice rising and falling in complex patterns. The wizard's spell was working. Roots began writhing more actively, vines creeping toward the Covenant soldiers with predatory intent. The forest was waking, and its awakening was angry. Charge! The The captain ordered and the soldiers advanced.
What followed was chaos.
Myra's divine barrier turned aside crossbow bolts while Kellen's arrows found gaps in armor. Zara struck from shadows, her daggers finding vulnerable points before she melted away again. But they were being pushed back, forced into a defensive circle as the Covenant soldiers pressed their numerical advantage. Ventheron's spell reached critical mass. The thornwood erupted. Roots burst from the ground like striking serpents, entangling soldiers and dragging them down. Vines dropped from above, wrapping around weapons and pulling them from grasping hands. The trees themselves seemed to lean inward, their branches forming a cage around the Covenant forces. In the confusion, Kellen spotted their escape route, a narrow path between two massive oaks, almost invisible unless you knew to look for it. "Go," he shouted, and his companions didn't hesitate. They ran through the awakened forest, pursued by screams and the sounds of desperate combat as the Covenant fought against wooden foes that felt no pain and knew no mercy. The Thornwood had accepted Theron's bargain. In exchange for removing all intruders from its boundaries, it would let them pass. But as they fled, Kellen's mind was racing through the implications of what the captain had said. The Iron Covenant knew about the Keystone's reality-warping power. They weren't just seeking ancient weapons, they were pursuing the ability to reshape the world itself. And if they reached Etherholm first, if they gained access to even one complete keystone, the Sundering would look like a minor inconvenience compared to what would follow. They had to reach the Vault City. They had to understand the keystones before anyone else could claim them. And most critically, they had to prevent those artifacts from being used as weapons. Because the message from the previous explorer was right, the road to Etherholm would test them. Earth, min, and sacrifice. And Kellen had a sinking feeling that the first trial had only just begun. The scarred peaks earned their name from the jagged wounds carved into their slopes, remnants of the Sundering's devastation, where reality itself had fractured and healed poorly. Kellen stood at the base of the final ascent, staring up at what remained of Etherholm. The city clung to the mountainside like a memory refusing to fade, its towers still defying gravity despite 4 millennia of neglect. They'd lost the Iron Covenant in the Thornwood, but that victory had come at a cost. The forest's awakened wrath had pursued everyone, forcing them to flee with minimal supplies and no time to properly prepare for mountain climbing. They'd spent 2 weeks in brutal terrain, rationing food and water while navigating unstable slopes. "The entrance is there," Myra said, pointing at a massive gateway carved into the mountain itself. 2 colossal statues flanked it, one depicting a dwarf with upraised hammer, the other an elf with arms spread wide as if embracing the sky. Both were worn by time, but still conveyed a sense of majesty. They'd passed the first trial, Earth. The mountain itself had tested them, forcing them to work together to overcome avalanches, navigate treacherous paths, and survive rockfalls that seemed almost deliberately targeted. Kellen's ranger skills had proven invaluable, finding routes where none seemed to exist, but it had been teamwork that saved them repeatedly. The gateway opened into a vast hall, its ceiling lost in shadows overhead. The walls were covered in murals depicting the First Era's history, the architect races working in harmony, building wonders, pushing the boundaries of magic and knowledge. But the later panels showed darker scenes, disagreement, conflict, the terrible weapons being forged. At the hall's center stood a door unlike anything Kellen had seen. It had no handles, no visible locks, just a smooth surface covered in flowing script that seemed to shift and change as he watched. "The second trial," Theron said quietly.
Mar.
"This is a puzzle lock, a test of understanding." He approached cautiously, studying the moving symbols. "It's asking a question. Not in words, but in concepts. It wants to know if we understand why the keystones were created and what they represent." They spent hours analyzing the puzzle, combining Theron's arcane knowledge with Mira's theological training and Kellen's practical experience with ancient sites. The answer, when it finally emerged, was both simple and profound. The keystones represented balance. Not power to control reality, but responsibility to maintain it. Kellen placed his hand on the door and projected that understanding through the fragment he carried. The symbols stopped shifting, glowed briefly, and the door opened. Beyond lay the vault itself, a chamber so vast it could have contained a castle. Shelves stretched in every direction, holding artifacts, scrolls, crystalline data storage devices. And at the chamber's center, on a raised platform, rested 3 complete keystones. Perfect crystalline spheres, each one large as a human head, pulsing with patient power. But they weren't alone. The Iron Covenant captain stood before the platform, flanked by a dozen soldiers who'd somehow found another route through the mountains. Her armor was battered, her face haggard, but her eyes burned with zealous determination. In her hands she held a device, a resonance amplifier of first-era design, stolen from some other vault. "I wondered if you'd make it," she said. "Part of me hoped you wouldn't. You seem like reasonable people, and I take no pleasure in killing reasonable people." She gestured at the keystones. "But I will if you interfere. The Covenant's mission is too important to let sentimentality compromise it. Your mission will destroy everything." Myra countered. "The keystones aren't meant to be wielded. They're meant to anchor reality. Using them as weapons will tear the world apart. Then the world deserves to be torn apart and rebuilt correctly." The captain replied. "You've seen the chaos out there. Kingdoms warring endlessly, suffering without purpose, waste and inefficiency everywhere. With the Keystone's power, we can eliminate all of that. Create a perfect order." She raised the amplifier toward the nearest keystone. Kellen's mind raced. They couldn't fight the Covenant soldiers directly, they were outnumbered and exhausted. But the vault itself, he felt it through the fragment, felt the vast network of preservation spells and defensive wards still active after all this time. The architects had designed this place to protect the keystones from exactly this kind of misuse. "Theron," he said quietly, "can you convince the vault that the Covenant represents a threat to the keystones?" The wizard's eyes widened with understanding. It would require tapping into the fragment's connection to the vault's security systems. The magical feedback could be catastrophic. "Do it." What followed happened in heartbeats. Theron channeled power through the fragment while Kellen served as a living conduit, connecting his will to the vault's ancient defenses. The response was immediate. Wards that had slept for millennia activated with fury. Energy barriers materialized, separating the Covenant soldiers from the keystones. The floor beneath them began to shift, tiles rearranging into a maze that prevented direct approach. But the captain had already touched the amplifier to the keystone. The device activated, creating a resonance between her ambition and the artifact's reality warping potential. For one terrible moment, Kellen saw what she envisioned, a world unified by force, all free will subordinated to the Covenant's vision of perfect order. It was a nightmare dressed as utopia. The keystone rejected her, not because she was unworthy in some moral sense, but because she fundamentally misunderstood its nature. The keystones didn't grant wishes or impose will upon reality. They maintained the balance between what was and what could be, preventing existence from fragmenting into chaos or calcifying into stasis. They required understanding, not ambition. The feedback was catastrophic. The amplifier shattered, sending shards of enchanted crystal in every direction. The captain screamed as power beyond mortal tolerance flooded through her, burning away her ambitions and leaving only smoke and silence. Her soldiers fled. In the aftermath, Kellen and his companions stood before the keystones, understanding at last what they truly represented. Not weapons, not tools, they were responsibilities. Each one anchored a fundamental aspect of reality: time, space, matter, energy, life, death, order, chaos, creation, destruction, truth, and dream. They worked in concert, maintaining the delicate balance that allowed existence itself. "We can't leave them here," Zara said. "Others will come. The knowledge is spreading, and we can't use them," Myra added. The captain proved that. Theron was examining the vault's records. Scrolls and crystalline storage that contained the architect's accumulated knowledge. There's another option. The architects created these vaults as more than storage. They were designed to be maintained by inheritors, people who would study the keystones without trying to exploit them. Custodians, not masters. It was the third trial, sacrifice. Not a dramatic gesture or painful loss, but the willingness to dedicate their lives to protecting something they could never fully use. To study power without wielding it, to guard knowledge without claiming ownership. Kellen looked at his companions and saw the same realization in their eyes. They'd sought adventure, treasure, the thrill of discovery. What they'd found was something far more important and infinitely more demanding. "We stay," he said simply. And so they became the vault's new custodians. joining a tradition that stretched back to the Sundering itself. They studied the keystones and the architect's records, learning to maintain the balance without disrupting it. When other seekers came, and they did come, drawn by rumors and fragments, Callan and his companions would test them, teaching those who could learn and turning away those who couldn't. The fragment that had started everything remained with Callan, a reminder of how a simple discovery could change everything. Sometimes when he held it in the quiet hours between midnight and dawn, he thought about the adventurer he'd been, the one who'd sought glory and excitement in forgotten ruins. That person seemed impossibly young now, impossibly naive, but not wrong. The excitement was still there, in every scroll deciphered, every mystery unraveled. The glory too, though of a quieter sort, the knowledge that they were preventing another Sundering, maintaining the balance that let life flourish. Years later, when a young explorer arrived at Etherholm carrying a fragment she'd found in distant ruins, Callan welcomed her to the vault. He saw in her eyes the same hunger for knowledge, the same naive certainty that she could handle whatever she discovered. He remembered that feeling, remembered standing in the gilded compass, thinking he'd found a valuable artifact, never imagining it would reshape his entire existence. "Come in," he said, gesturing at the endless shelves of knowledge. "There's so much to learn. But first, let me tell you about the keystones, and why some discoveries are worth dedicating your life to protect." The vault's doors closed behind them, and another inheritor began their education in the ancient arts of responsibility and restraint. The keystones pulsed gently on their platform, patient as mountains, eternal as the balance they maintained. And deep in the earth, in vaults scattered across the world, other fragments waited to be found, other seekers to be tested, other stories to unfold in the shadow of the First Era's legacy. The echoes continued, as they always would, until the last inheritor finally understood what the architects had learned too late. True power lies not in reshaping the world to match your vision, but in accepting the responsibility to protect it as it is, flawed, chaotic, miraculous, and worth preserving.